The origins of Western civilization's sexual revolution. What started the sexual revolution? One intriguing piece of history that few people seem to know about is the true origins of what has been called the sexual revolution within the West. As you could likely guess, it has a malevolent genesis. But just how bad could it be? Probably even worse than you expect. The sexual revolution starts with a man named Kinsey. But before we get to him, let's explore the so-called revolution itself.
The sexual revolution. The sexual revolution, also known as sexual liberation, was a social movement that challenged traditional codes of behavior related to sexuality and interpersonal relationships throughout the developed Western world from the 1960s to the 1970s. Sexual liberation included increased acceptance of sex outside of traditional heterosexual, monogamous relationships, primarily marriage. The normalization of contraception and the pill, public nudity, pornography, premarital sex, homosexuality, masturbation, alternative forms of sexuality, and the legalization of abortion all followed.
This revolution was a major moral degeneration that inflicted the West. This single event led to the destruction of the family, the proliferation of degeneracy in every cultural avenue, and degraded nearly all of our institutions in some fashion. If you wonder how everything got so degenerated so fast, it's helpful to look at where the fire first got roaring. There is a long and sordid history leading to that roaring fire. We definitely had some intelligentsia backbone stemming from the Freudian school, Margaret Mead and the like, who were fanning the flames. But the match that finally set everything ablaze was a man by the name of Alfred C. Kinsey. His studies and books pushed the academic sexual revolution into the entire civilizational culture. He made the theories common practice. Because of this, Kinsey is known as the father of the sexual revolution. Who was this man, you may ask? He was a homosexual reprobate pedophile collaborator who let his wife sleep with as many men as feasible. Oh, and most of his relevant research that led to our sexual revolution was a lie based on one anonymous pedophile, whom Kinsey collaborated with. The data parts that were not based on this pedophile were often baseless or manufactured with Kinsey's bias in mind. Are you surprised? You shouldn't be. Evil begets evil. We will see that clearly as we look into the history of this subject. Let's just dive right in with a good introduction article.
The true story of Alfred Kinsey, the controversial sexologist and father of the sexual revolution. Alfred Kinsey has been hailed the father of the sexual revolution. For one, his open and curious attitude about sex brought the subject into the mainstream. He wrote two unprecedented and in-depth explorations of human sexuality known as the Kinsey Reports and has been credited with paving the way for the sexual liberation and gay rights movements of the 1960s and 1970s. But how Kinsey conducted his research is often revisited for its controversy and, by some accounts, for its immorality. Indeed, there is a far darker side to Alfred Kinsey's legacy. Although Kinsey has often been hailed as the father of the sexual revolution, it was not just religious voices who sought to defame him. Statisticians have pointed out that these subjects were not representative of the population at large and leaned towards people who were sexually active and adventurous. In other words, Kinsey's research was in part biased. Kinsey himself was certainly biased in favor of sexual activity. Having once declared, "There are only three kinds of sexual abnormalities: abstinence, celibacy, and delayed marriage." However, how professional Kinsey was throughout his research is also often brought into question. He allegedly encouraged his research associates to engage in sexual activity with each other and pressured students and team members alike to engage in that activity with him. Kinsey's assistant, Clyde Martin, even engaged in a sexual relationship with his wife. Kinsey kept recorded video and image evidence of sexual intercourse between subjects, assistants, and friends. Some of these he even participated in.
But Kinsey went further than videotaping and exploiting his own students. He even enabled a pedophile.
Indeed, Kinsey went so far as to research sexual stimulation in children as young as 5 months old. One of the subjects he interviewed for sexual behavior in the human male was a 63-year-old pedophile named Rex King who had attempted to bring to orgasm boys between the ages of 2 months and 15 years. It only recently emerged that this data around sexuality in children came from one single man in Kinsey's research, rather than from the several that Kinsey had initially claimed. By shielding King in this way, Kinsey may have enabled him.
So let's see. Kinsey knowingly lied about all of his child sex research data, claiming it was from many sources, but in reality, it came from one pedophile that was actively raping children. This data also came from a pedophile rapist. This research data was used to push the sexual revolution in the West. The claim was that children are sexual from birth, so we should not be so prude. Now, I'm no professional scientist, thank God, but I don't think that qualifies as actual data. Data from children who are forced into sex acts by pedophiles is not something I would consider valid to allow for a complete upheaval of our entire moral code. But it happened anyway. Meanwhile, when Kinsey wasn't hanging out with his pedophile buddy, he was actively coercing his students to have sex with him or his wife. Seems like a great guy. Yeah, we should totally base our morality system around his research/sarcasm. Also, side note, how many times do I have to say it? Never trust a cuckold. They are completely screwed in the head. Just stop it. If a cuckold ever says anything, disregard it. Don't even engage. It's not worth it. These are our trustworthy experts and scientists. You wonder why I don't trust the experts? Because this guy is considered an expert in the field of human sexuality. Even now, when this information is public knowledge. This is the same kind of research that the Germans had to deal with during the Weimar Republic. It is eerie how similar Kinsey's institute is to the Institute of Sexology. We are Weimar, my friend. But the history gets even worse.
The truth behind Alfred Kinsey. Q. Why is Kinsey a controversial character for some and heroic figure for others? Brinkman, the only difference between those who consider Kinsey controversial and those who consider him heroic is nothing more than a matter of education. Anyone who reads the work of Dr. Judith Reisman, whose research is the basis for my book, The Kinsey Corruption, will see not only factual, written evidence of Kinsey's questionable background, they'll see photographs and letters he wrote to friends about his collection of homosexual pornography. None of the information about Kinsey's sordid background is alleged, it's out there in black and white. If you're not reading it, you don't want to. There are films depicting Kinsey and his staff engaging in all kinds of sex acts in the attic of the Kinsey home that still exist, films that were made by professional cinematographers who have never denied their existence. There is also a documentary called Kinsey's Pedophiles that details Kinsey's involvement with pedophiles and other sexual miscreants from whom he gathered the data that supposedly supports his hypothesis that children are sexual from birth. How can such a notorious man continue to command hero status? Because of the lucrative financial awards available to those who promoted the sexual revolution, he started. Kinsey's two books, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, published in 1948, and Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, which followed in 1952, started what we now call the sexual revolution. This revolution is a lot more than just a change in attitude. It's a business, a multi-billion-dollar business. This contraceptive mentality was born in the kind of sexual license that Kinsey endorsed. He believed pornography was harmless. That adultery can enhance a marriage and that children are sexual from birth. Keeping these and other Kinsey myths alive is why the porn industry is thriving and why abortion and contraception providers rake in millions of dollars every year.
Don't those myths sound familiar? Pornography is harmless, adultery is no big deal. Widespread sexualization of children is fine. And so on. We still hear this today. Now you know where it came from. It came first from Kinsey's screwed up mind. He used his position as a scientist authority to infest these lies everywhere. He's a perfect example of a subversion intelligentsia agent. The above article then includes this description of the man.
He was a pederast who enjoyed public nudity, made explicit sex films and eventually developed such an extreme sadomasochistic form of autoeroticism that some believe it caused his untimely death in 1956. This is not the sort of thing he wanted the public to know about. He maintained a meticulously engineered facade of a typical Midwestern family man at all costs because it was so critical to his success. and to his financial backing from the Rockefeller Foundation. Q. Did Kinsey's religious background influence his research in any way? Brinkman? Absolutely. Kinsey was born into a strict Methodist home in Hoboken, New Jersey, in 1894. Dancing, tobacco, alcohol and dating were all forbidden. He eventually severed all ties with his parents and their religion, and lived the rest of his life as an avid atheist.
So he even lied about who he was and what he was like. Everything in this guy's life was a fraud. And he knew and rejected Christ. Reprobate. Done deal. But even if we completely ignore his personal life, his public life is no different. All lies and shadiness. Some of his data was outright fraudulent. For one example,
his studies concerning child sexuality are the most outrageous, and some say criminal, of all. Kinsey relied on pedophiles who sent him data from their crimes. He used this data to claim that children as young as 4 months are capable of sexual arousal. Kinsey staff member and co-author Paul Gebhard admitted that they were relying on information being sent to them by a man named Rex King, a serial rapist who was guilty of raping more than 800 children. Perhaps the most widely publicized connection between Kinsey and a known pedophile took place in Germany a year after Kinsey's death. Notorious Nazi pedophile Dr. Fritz von Balasek was on trial for the rape and murder of a 10-year-old girl when correspondence from Kinsey was found in his possession. Kinsey was encouraging the doctor to continue sending him data from his crimes and even urged him to be careful in one letter.
Using pedophiles to catalog child sex data is clearly fraudulent. He also lied about the source of the data. It's only recently we've uncovered the above truth. You may wonder how he manipulated the little data he had that was not outright fraudulent. This is how.
Serious social scientists know that they can't rely on volunteers for sexual studies because it attracts a disproportionate number of unconventional men and women. Relying on these volunteers would produce results that showed a falsely high percentage of non-virginity, masturbation, promiscuity, and homosexuality in the population. However, this is precisely what Kinsey did. Kinsey classified 1,400 criminals and sex offenders as normal on the grounds that such miscreants were essentially the same as other men, except that these had gotten caught. The human males category could then include incarcerated pedophiles, pederasts, homosexual males, boy prostitutes, and miscellaneous sexual predators.
When those two strategies didn't work, he just outright refused to publish the data.
Second, Kinsey refused to publish the basic data upon which his conclusions rested. Third, he refused to reveal the questionnaire upon which he based all of his facts.
Modern science, everyone. This is the kind of science that is driving Western civilization's entire moral system. No wonder we are on a crash course to destruction. Here is one report of one of Kinsey's child victims.
Child victim of Kinsey sex research tells story of rape. Lynchburg, VA. After claiming her father was paid by sexologist Alfred C. Kinsey during the 1940s to rape her for his research compilation, Esther White, pseudonym, is speaking out on how she was a child victim of these sex studies. Kinsey, the Indiana University researcher who is known as the father of the sexual revolution, founded the Kinsey Institute in 1953, which claims it works toward advancing sexual health and knowledge worldwide. However, the methods Kinsey used are unethical by any standard, and the data is flawed. Esther was only 7 years old when her father began the illicit sexual experimentation on her, performing different acts with her, timing her reaction with a stopwatch, and even visually recording the entire process to send to Kinsey. Kinsey had befriended Esther's grandfather in college, who encouraged his son to join in on the experiment. Esther says she witnessed both her father and grandfather personally receiving checks from Kinsey for their sexual acts. She also found a checklist of her father's that listed what he was doing to her, which would be given to Kinsey for research.
Kinsey recorded the horrific rape data in what is known as Kinsey's infamous Table 34. There is actually a documentary that goes by the same name. The Children of Table 34. This documentary pairs nicely with Kinsey's Pedophiles documentary. Most people did not know this information back when Kinsey was popular. 50 years later, we know the truth. We know now, without debate, that many of the findings about prepubescent sexual activity relied on the diaries of one anonymous pedophile. The data that did not come from this source still relied on other pedophiles or was completely manufactured through false studies. This research is what started the sexual revolution in the U.S. It should come as no surprise to the tuned-in dissident that it is all a lie. But even though the truth about this information has come out, no one is willing to dial back the clock on the sexual revolution, because this is what the elites want to push on us. They use lies to justify their deviancy, and they do not care that those lies are publicly known now. The family system, our culture, and our overall spirit have already suffered a tremendous blow. The evils of the deranged sex culture around us exploded because of the evil of one Christ-denying pedophile collaborator. But sadly, it did not end with him. We forsook a healthy moral framework for one developed completely around this freak's perversions. Is anyone surprised that we've fallen so far, given this information?